G'day poker people, welcome back. In the last video I talked about how I was staying in Sarasota and I bought my brand new used car so I was able to get around to whichever poker room I wanted to. Now they do have a poker room in Sarasota which I was keen to check out, and we'll actually get to that in the next video, which you'll get if you hit subscribe. But in the meantime, I was really keen to go back to my favorite card room in all of Florida, the Seminole Hard Rick Tampa. It was about a 45 to an hour and a half drive depending how bad traffic was up from Sarasota, and I made the trip up 7 of the following 10 days that we're about to cover in this video. So let's strap in, get into the action and play some 2-5. Let's go. Very first hand up, I'm under the gun and I decide to put the $10 straddle on. Let's go, let's mix it up, let's get some action brewing in this game. Then a passive low jack open limps and an aggressive button raises it up to 20. Then the action's on my straddle with king jack offsuit, and clearly I'm in the mood to push some action a bit because I 3-bet it up to 95. Wouldn't hate just flatting with this hand in the straddle either, but I 3-bet in this instance, and then the limper calls and the button folds. So it heads up to a flop of a 6-5 deuce with 2 hearts. The action's on me here, and I actually think we have a pretty decent combination to semi-bluff with. We are going to have equity to a lot of my opponent's single pair calls, unless I did trap with aces or kings pre-flop. If we do get a fold from ace-x combinations, that's pretty sweet as well. So I go ahead and bet 125, and then the villain throws in the call. Not quite what we wanted to see, and the turn doesn't help us out either. It is the 6 of clubs pairing top pair. This is going to be an awful card for my range of hands, so I don't think this is a good spot to continue to barrel. Don't want to be bluffing too aggressively here with all my king jack offsuit combinations, so I check it over to the villain who checks back, and we see the river, which is the jack of clubs. Let's freaking go. I absolutely love this river. We now make a pair that's strong enough to bet for value, in my opinion, value targeting pocket 10s through pocket 7s. So I go ahead and make it 200, and then the button raises to 600. And wow, I was really not expecting this. I did think if my opponent had a 6, they probably would have just bet on the turn, hoping that I had an overpair. So I don't actually give them that much credit for 6x combinations. Essentially what I'm really worried about here is ace jack that they're raising for thin value, or maybe like pocket jacks that we block super hard. Quads or a full house are somewhat possible, but that's just like, it's a very narrow range that I can actually put them on with a raise here. I think it's much more likely that they're bluffing, to be honest. Flush draw or ace queen, and even if they were turning a worse pair into a bluff, I wouldn't be totally shocked either. But you can see here, their bluffing range is really wide and their value range is really narrow. So I actually think this is a great spot to hero call, in my opinion. It's rare I say that versus river raises in a live 2-5 game, but I think this is a good spot for it. So I do throw in the call, and then the opponent says those magic words. You're good, man. Turns over the ace deuce of diamonds. There you go, he did turn a worse pair into a flush, and we're gonna rake in this pot. Let's freaking go. Next hand up, a passive low jack open limps, and then a tight aggressive hijack raises it up to 15. And the action folds to my small blind with pocket 8s, the DOS ultras. Definitely a hand strong enough to 3-bet here, in my opinion. I go ahead and make it 70, and then the limper cold calls, which is a bit interesting because they started the hand with about 200 effective, so the SPR is going to be a lot less than 1, even if they're the only one that calls, but they're not the only one that calls because the hijack calls behind them. So it's definitely interesting with a very short stack in the middle of the deeper stacks, myself and hijack. Whatever the case, we do go 3 ways to a flop, and here's a good one. King A4 with 2 clubs. Let's freaking go. We do make middle set. Now the action's on me here, and usually I would like betting middle set here, even with my recent passive bias. But I will say, with the short stack in the mix, I think it might be a good spot to just go ahead and check it to them. I think they're going to take a lot of stabs on this board, essentially with anything that has showdown value. So in that case, we definitely want some strong hands. Mix in a bit of a trap when we know the opponent's going to be betting very often. So I check it over to them, and unfortunately they do check back. So that definitely sucked, but we do get a bit of action though, because the hijack goes ahead and bets 50. So very small bet there. And the action's on me here. I do think it might be a good spot to continue trapping here, just because if we do go ahead and check raise here, I think it's going to be highly unlikely that the low jack is going to want to get it in very often. And if we do flat, I think it's more likely that they'll rip it with any 10 or any flush draw combination. We really don't want to discourage them from doing so. So I think it's a good spot to trap. I do mix in the call, and then the low jack does call as well, so they don't even rip it in, despite us giving them rope twice. Whatever the case, they are still in the hand, and we are still three ways to a turn. Is the Queen of Diamonds. Very happy to see it gives my opponents more two-pair combinations. And now in this spot, I really don't think that the low jack is very reliable to be going all in if I check to them, since I've given them two options to do it now. So I think it might just be a good spot to mix in a lead bet and try to get as much action and money in the pot as we can. So I go ahead and bet 120, and then the low jack finally puts it all in for 80, and then the action's on the hijack, and they think for maybe a good 10 seconds before ripping it all in. That is absolute music to our ears. We snap a Rooney call, I show my hand straight away, and then the hijack shows Ace King of Diamonds. So definitely a bit of a sweat. They can hit any diamond on the river to scoop us all. The all-in low jack does not want to show their hand, and the river, two of hearts. Let's go. We love seeing that. We're going to win at least the side pot. And then the low jack mucks their cards, so we end up scooping both the side and the main pot, and we're hitting stats and stacking people. Let's go. Before we get into the next hand, I just wanted to take this opportunity to invite all of you to join the Anti-Gambling Gambling Club. Head over to leebets.com. We have a bunch of different anti-gambling gambling club t-shirts, hats, and hoodies in all different types of sizes and colors. So head over to leebets.com and join the club. But for now, let's get back into the gambling. Next hand up, I'm under the gun with pocket nines, another beautiful hand. I go ahead and make it 15, and then I get no less than 3 different callers. So we go 4 ways to a flop of Queen, Queen, 6, a rainbow. About as dry as a flop can possibly get. When the action checks to me, wouldn't hate a bet here, essentially for equity denial, but I think playing it cautious makes a lot of sense when we're when we've got 3 different ranges to beat. So I do check it, and then a unknown hijack goes ahead and bets 35. Both the other opponents fold, and I throw in the call here. So we go heads up to a turn, which is the 8 of hearts putting out backdoor hearts. I check it over to the aggressor again, then they go ahead and bet 50. Definitely starting to be a little bit concerned because we do lose to a queen or a full house here. Having said that, we are getting a great price to bluff catch, and if the opponent did turn a gut shot with like Jack 10, this would be a great opportunity for them to keep bluffing with a hand like that. So got to give them some credits for bluffs, particularly as an unknown opponent. So I do throw in the call, and then we're still heads up to a river, which is the 10 of hearts putting in backdoor hearts. Definitely don't like this river. We now lose to Jack 10, heart draws on the turn, and the obvious hands that were Queen X and full houses. So definitely going to check it over to the opponent. Goes ahead and bets 150, and as I mentioned, I really don't like this river. I really don't like that the opponent's shown aggression over 3 streets. I think the chances that they have a queen or stronger is pretty likely on this river. If they did have Jack 10, I don't necessarily think they would bet the hand on the river for value. I do think, unfortunately, we have to fold at this point. So that's what I do. I put my hand in the muck. Then the opponent looks very, very happy, and they ask me, do you want to see my hand? And already I know what that means. But I'm like, go ahead, mate. Show me the bluff. He shows King 3 offsuit with the King of Hearts. So, wow, great bluff from the villain. I would have not put them on King 3 there. But definitely think I have to update this opponent's player type to lag after this beautiful bluff. Next one's a really interesting one. So it starts off with a $10 straddle on the button, and then a passive big blind raises it up to 50 off of a $300 stack, which is going to be pretty important going forward. So I'm literally next to act under the gun with pocket 10s. And already, this is a pretty interesting spot with what we want to do. If we go ahead and 3-bet with this hand, we're probably going to have to get all in against the big blind, which I actually really don't want to do, because I honestly think they have a pretty strong range, being that they're a passive opponent raising 5x pre-flop. They're definitely going to have all of the overpairs to mine in their range, probably ace-king as well. Really don't like the idea of 3-betting. I also don't want to cold call either, because like they raise so big pre-flop, especially in relation to their stack, there's just not going to be much room for us to maneuver pre-flop. So I don't like calling either, which leaves me with one option. It's the nitty option, but I think it might be the best option in this spot. I think this is a good spot to fold. We've still got 6 people left to act. We're facing a really tight, it's even tighter than an under the gun range, hypothetically anyway. It should be with the button straddle. So I just think they're absolutely nutted. Really don't want to V-pip more money against them. So I do decide to fold my pocket tens. Needle me for being a nit if you want in the comments below, but we do get a little bit of reassurance anyway since everyone else at the table folds and the villain does table pocket aces. So very glad I got away from the pocket tens there. Next hand up, we're still rolling with the button straddle. It's on for 10, and then both the small blind and big blind open limp before the action's on a tight aggressive under the gun player who boosts it up to 50, and then I'm in the hijack. I look down and it's my turn to start throwing the batteries around because I have the double A pocket aces. Let's go. I 3-bet it up to 150. And then only the under the gun player calls. So it heads up to a flop of 966 with 2 hearts. When the villain checks it over to me, great spot to go ahead and value bet my strong hand here. I go ahead and make it 150 and then the villain does call. So it heads up to a turn which is the King of Diamonds. The villain checks it over to me, and I think this turn card is pretty interesting because it might be a scare card to a lot of my opponent's worst hands that called on the flop. If they have a pair of 9s, pocket 10s, pocket jacks, they're probably going to hate this king card on the turn. Having said that, definitely want to continue to bet here. I would be betting with any bluff like ace queen, ace 5 suited for example, a flush draw. So definitely want to balance it out with some strong hands like pocket aces, but I think it might be a good spot to use a smaller size bet just because I don't want to scare off too many of my opponent's worst hands. And I will say, by the way, I definitely think it's possible that my opponent does have 6x or pocket 9s, the hands we lose to. So not a huge amount of incentive to boost up the pot too much here. So I do bet a bit smaller. I make it 175, which honestly, I think I could go a bit closer to 200 if we want to get into the nitty gritty. Whatever the case though, I made it 175 and the villain does throw in the call. So now it heads up to the river, which is the Jack of Diamonds. The villain checks it over to me once more, and now I'm kind of in a pickle because I am honestly concerned that the opponent could have a 6x combination. They're going to have way more of those in their range than I'm going to have in mine. And even if they do have a hand like 10-9 or King X of Hearts, they're going to be pretty hard pressed to call off 3 streets here. Having said that, I think maybe we should try and eke out a bit more thin value with a small bet here. Maybe something less than 300 will be a good idea. I definitely think ripping it all in would be a mistake, but there might be a bit more thin value to eke out here. In game, I didn't do this though. I think I got a bit too worried that the opponent could have a 6 or a full house here, so I did decide to check it back, which I honestly think is a mistake. I think I should just be trying to get more value from their worst pairs with a small bet. Whatever the case though, I did check it back and the opponent showed ace 9 of diamonds. So not going to be good enough to win the hand, but I guess I'm going to die wondering if I could have got a bit more thin value from that hand specifically. Let me know what you think in the comments. So the next time I went back to the Hard Rock, it was because they were running another one of their extremely generous high hand promos. In fact, it was the same one that I talked about in this video, where they were giving away $5,000 every 3 hours with the potential Royal Flush resetting the prize money. So I was definitely keen to put in a lot of hours during this promo, particularly since I had to drive an hour from Sarasota to get there. The one thing I do want to say about the dynamics of these hands that we're going to cover is I want you to keep in mind the ratio of professional poker players that are going to be sitting these daytime promos is a lot higher typically than it would be if I played on a Friday night, for example, just because recreational players are typically going to be working work hours during this time. So that's important to keep in mind with the dynamics as we go forward, but enough jibber jabber, let's get into the first hand from this session. So in this hand we see an open limp from the hijack and button. Then I'm in the big blind with ace 10 offsuit. I raise it up to 35 and then both villains call. So we go 3 ways to a flop of queen 9-7 rainbow. Pretty hard whiff for us, so I just check it over to the 2 villains to see what they do. But then they check it around as well. So we get a free turn, which is the 8 of spades, putting out backdoor spades, but also giving us an open-ended straight draw. So we like that. I consider bluffing here, but I think with ace high, it might be a good spot to just check it over. We do have a bit of showdown value here, so don't necessarily only want to filter out my opponent's worst hands with a bet. Wouldn't hate a bet though, but I do go ahead and check it, and then the hijack checks and the button goes ahead and bets 25, so a quarter size pot bet. Definitely not going to fold my open-ended straight draw with a little bit of showdown value here to a quarter size bet. I think I prefer calling to check raising just because I don't think a check raise really represents a lot, and it'll be kind of obvious I'm bluffing if I do it. So I do throw in the call and the hijack folds. So we are heads up to a river, which is the 7 of spades. And this is a beautiful river because we do have the nut flush blocker, but we're also going to have a lot of flushes in our range. I think with the tighter daytime dynamics going on, I think the opponent will be able to make the read that I have a flush here if I continue with an aggressive line. So my initial thought is I should check raise, but I actually think the opponent's going to check back a lot. I'm not super convinced that they have a very strong hand here unless it is a flush, which we block. I think it's much more likely they have a weaker 9x hand or maybe a small queen x, but I think a lot of their range is going to want to fold if I go ahead with a lead here, particularly considering the tighter daytime dynamics. So I go for it, I lead 125, and then my opponent folds pretty quickly. So let's go, we get the bluff through. Next hand up, we got the button straddle back on. Let's go, small blind open limps, and I'm under the gun with pocket eights. I ISO it up to 55, and then I get a call from a very good loose aggressive low jack, as well as a small blind as well. So we do go 3 ways to a flop of 6-4 deuce with 2 hearts. Small blind checks it over to me. Now I think this is a pretty mandatory c-bet spot, particularly with this hand. It's definitely strong enough to get value as an overpair, but it's very vulnerable as well. The vast majority of the deck is going to be a bad turn card for this hand in particular. So if I'm going to have a betting range, I think this hand absolutely needs to be in it. I would rather check with like kings or aces than I would check with this hand. So I go ahead and bet, I make it 80, and then the low jack raises it up to 160. Small blind gets out of the way, and already not loving this spot. I think there's a very decent chance we are ahead. However, even if we are ahead of my opponent, if they're semi-bluffing, they're going to get there on a lot of turns. Plus, there's always a possibility they do have a stronger overpair or flop to set. I really don't think this opponent would VP a 5-3 pre-flops. I'm not that worried about a straight, but a set or a stronger overpair would make a lot of sense, or a high equity draw. So very concerned that I do lose to a lot here. But having said that, when they min click me, we're getting such a good price, and we definitely want to defend some of our range against an aggressive opponent. So I do throw in the call here, and we're going to proceed to a turn, which is the king of hearts. So front door flush gets in, going to check it over to my opponent and see what they do. They continue betting. They go ahead and make it 175. So we are getting a pretty good price to continue defending here with our pocket eights, but we do lose to a bunch more stuff now. Not only those flop sets, not only those stronger overpairs, but the front door flush get in. Having said that though, we are versing an aggressive opponent, and if my read is that they're a good player, they're going to have at least some bluffs on this run out that's going to be scary for a lot of my range, since I'm going to have a lot of hands like I do in this spot in my range. So we need to defend with something, and I think pocket pairs that have a heart are probably good ones to use just because they are going to have more equity to suck out on my opponent if they do have a set or a stronger overpair, for example. So I do throw in the call here, but definitely proceeding with a lot of caution going forward. So we do stay heads up to the river, which is the king of diamonds. Pretty good river card. I check it over to the opponent, and then they check back, and there's absolute music to my ears. I show my pocket eights, and they end up putting their hand in the muck. Little surprised we ended up winning this hand. I guess the opponent was running a bluff. Power to them. I wouldn't say that we sniffed it out, but I'm just glad that I did defend my range. And we win this pot as a reward. So this next hand came about 10 hours into the session. The high hand promo was about to end, and I really wanted to stay until the end of the thing, but honestly I was feeling pretty exhausted at this point, as I usually am after 10 hours of poker. Still wanted to play this next hand as best I possibly could. We get a limp from a passive under the gun as well as a passive low jack, and then I'm on the button. It's my turn to start throwing the batteries around. I raise the pocket aces up to 30, and I get a call from a loose aggressive big blind as well as both of the limpers. So we go 4 ways to a flop of queen 10-8 with 2 clubs. Then something interesting happens. The big blind actually leads out for 45, and then both of the limpers call the 45. Now the action's on me here, and I think I just have to raise in this spot. The opponent bets so small. I think the chances my pocket aces are good here are pretty decent. We do lose to a lot on this board, particularly multi-way, but I just can't look myself in the mirror if I just call in this hand. There's a scare card on the turn, and then I got no idea what to do. Probably end up having to fold when I could have just raised here to deny a lot of equity or thin out the field a little bit. So I do decide to raise it up. I go ahead and make it 175, and then the big blind gets out of the way. Under the gun player actually calls the 175, and then the low jack rips it all in for 570, and straight away I am kicking myself for raising here. I am actually worried that I'm behind on this board. I think this passive opponent is probably going to have all the queen 10 offsuit combinations, probably all of the 10-8 offsuit combinations as well. Any set would make sense, and I know for a fact they don't have the nut flush draw because I have the ace of clubs in my hand, so the chances I'm behind here are pretty decent. In my opinion, if I am ahead, it's probably against a strong draw anyway, which I block a lot of. I think if the opponent had ace queen or like a really slow play pocket kings, I'll be surprised if they took this line with it, since they know I'm going to have a lot of kings and aces in my range. The other thing I have to be worried about is the under the gun player still in the hand. I think it's much more likely they do have a draw when they take a slow played line twice, but if they had a set or two pair as well, I wouldn't be shocked either. So we lose to a lot, particularly when it's against two different ranges. The only reason I might be tempted to call here is because we are getting a great price, particularly after we race it to 175, but it just doesn't tempt me enough to go ahead and invest another 395 in this pot. So even 10 hours into the session, I was actually pretty happy with myself that I did have the discipline to lay my pocket aces down. I throw the batteries in the muck, and then the under the gun player calls the 750, which I was pretty happy to see because now I'm going to get to see what both the opponents had. And then the low jack shows pocket kings. Oh, I'm absolutely kicking myself. Like, bro, you limp called with pocket kings. You could have got it all in pre-flop with me. Usually I try not to get tilted by these type of things, but I think I actually said something to that effect out loud at the table. I suppose after 10 hours of playing poker and the discipline it just took to make that fold, I kind of lost the discipline to hold my tongue there. So I actually said something to him because I was pretty frustrated, but it doesn't matter what I did because I'm out of the hand at this point. And then under the gun shows king jack of diamonds. So they do have the open-ended straight draw. And honestly, I'm kind of pulling for them to beat the pocket kings at this point. And then the turn is the six of diamonds, putting out the backdoor diamonds, which the under the gun player actually has. So really rooting for them to get there on the river. Then the river is the nine of diamonds. Let's go. They get there twice. They end up stacking the kings. We would have lost the hand. I mean, who cares what happens once I fold? Honestly, I should be totally detached, but I was tilted in the moment and I felt a bit vindicated that the guy's kings get cracked. That's silly though. I really shouldn't care. Let's go. That's going to wrap it up for this video. That was a total of 10 days that I ended up playing, all at the Seminole Hard Rick Tampa. But since I was living in Sarasota, I did decide to at least check out the One-Eyed Jack's poker room in Sarasota to see what happened there. That'll be my next video. Hit subscribe and you'll get it when it comes out. But for now, I'm out of here. Peace.